Every family has a rule that makes sense only to the people enforcing it. In ours, it wasn't about chores or curfew. It was geography. A border inside a two-bedroom house. Cross it, and you'd learn what real silence sounded like, the kind that comes after your mom stops speaking and your dad's jaw goes stone hard. Do not go into our bedroom. Not knock first. Not ask permission. Do not go. Like a tombstone commandment, etched into the air. As a kid, I used to imagine the doorbell had a third chime. Only my parents could hear the moment the knob turned. Because every time I tested that border, every time, curiosity overpowered the scrawny courage of an 8-year-old. They were there. My mom with this strange skeletal fear behind her eyes, like she recognized a disaster seconds before it happened. My dad with a voice that never rose above calm and somehow felt like a threat anyway. Punishments were the usual: no TV, no friends, grounded. But the tone wasn't anger, it was containment. As if their words were sandbags around a leak. And there was a leak. A sound that seeped through drywall in years, until it pooled in the hallway carpet at ankle height. Thump, thump, thump. You couldn't hear it from the living room, or the kitchen, or even standing directly under the AC vent that rattled like a loose tooth in summer. You heard it only in the hall, nose almost to the paint on their door, like the house itself was holding its breath to let you catch it. People say houses settle. This wasn't settling. This was someone counting time on the other side of a wall. I told myself it was plumbing because adults love blaming the pipes. I pressed my ear to the wood anyway. The rhythm got clearer near the far end of the room, where the wall backed up against the linen closet. If I squinted through the keyhole on those rare, terrible days the door wasn't locked, I could see the outline of a wardrobe on that wall. Big, dark, old, the kind of furniture that feels heavier than it looks because it's filled with everything your parents never say. I learned the floorboards that didn't squeak. I learned how to breathe shallow. I learned the exact thud of my mother's footfall, turning the corner from the kitchen, warning bell half a second before her shadow broke the threshold, and her hand wrapped around my wrist with a grip that didn't seem possible for someone who smelled like lavender dish soap. I learned, most importantly, that questions were landmines. At 13, I tried anyway. We were at dinner, a square of pork chops and canned green beans, and the evening news hissing in from the living room like static. I asked why I couldn't go in their room. I asked what the knocking was. My mother set down her knife so carefully it didn't make a sound. My father took his time finishing a bite. Then he looked at me the way a judge looks at a case that's already decided. "There is no knocking," he said, that exact way, like he was crossing a line of text out with a black marker. "And you will drop this. This is the last time we will ever speak of it." I told myself I would drop it. I told myself I didn't care. But late at night, in the kind of quiet that makes a clock sound like a heartbeat, I'd hear it, a soft, deliberate tap echoing in memory, even when the house was still. I'd think about the wardrobe, about how my mother moved around it when she cleaned, careful not to bump it, like it was a sleeping dog that might wake and bite. I'd think about the way she'd sometimes disappear into the bedroom for hours. No TV, no music, the hush so complete you could almost feel it through the door like a pressure change before a storm. Thump, thump, thump. Fear ripens in kids like fruit left on a windowsill. By 16, mine was overripe, sweet, and rotten at the same time. I started making private deals with myself. If I get an A in chemistry, I'll forget about the door. If I learn to drive without stalling at the light by the Walgreens, I'll stop listening in the hall. But the day I crashed Mom's Civic into a shopping cart return, I found myself in the hallway anyway, cheek against the cool paint, waiting. When the sound came patient, almost polite, it felt less like a noise and more like being chosen. You can live with a monster you know how to map. I mapped hours by the rules. Never open the door, never ask, never turn your ear toward the far wall when anyone else is home. And I kept the map folded and hidden under my ribs. It worked, in the way bad coping strategies always work right up until they don't. The first crack in the map wasn't a sound. It was relief. On the day I told my parents I'd saved enough to move out, I didn't see sadness. Not even the brittle kind people put on for show. What I saw on my father's face was a release he didn't have to explain. As if the border guard was being reassigned to a different country and he would finally sleep. It scared me more than any threat he'd ever made. Because if my leaving made them safer, then what did my staying protect? That night I lay awake on a mattress that suddenly felt temporary, looking at water stains on my ceiling in the shapes of countries no one would visit. The knocking didn't come. The silence did. And I realized silence in our house wasn't the absence of sound. It was a lid, a manhole cover. The kind you stand on and feel the hollow under your feet like it's waiting. We tell ourselves stories to survive. Mine went like this. There's nothing in the bedroom. The rules were just about privacy. The knocking was pipes, or wind, or the idiocy of a kid who wanted attention. The wardrobe belonged to a grandparent with a dramatic streak. My mother's hour-long retreats were baths. My father's threats were parenting. The way my chest felt when I passed that doorwell, that was anxiety, and America breeds it like corn. I believed every word, right up until I didn't. On my last night in that house, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a laundry bag, socks, hoodies. The photo my friend Gus took of me at the county fair last fall, that made me look like someone worth rooting for. I zipped the bags. I turned off the light. I stood in the hallway one more time, bare feet on cool wood, watching the rectangle of my parents' door glow a shade lighter than the wall around it. I didn't press my ear to the seam. I didn't have to. The house was holding its breath again, and so was I. The morning light didn't feel like light at all. It felt like a spotlight, hot and accusatory, cutting through the curtains into my half-empty bedroom. My suitcases sat like witnesses against the wall. Everything I owned was zipped inside them, and everything I didn't understand was behind that other door. The one I had never been allowed to open. I ate breakfast with my parents like it was any other day. Eggs, toast, and my father's silence. My mother asked if I'd packed toothpaste. My father asked if my car's oil had been changed. Their words fell flat, like the script of a play that had been performed too many times. We all pretended the knocking didn't exist. I had rehearsed my line for weeks, the same way you rehearse a breakup. Say it straight, no tremble, no apology. When the moment came, my throat betrayed me anyway. "Dad," I said, "before I go, please, just tell me what's in your room." The clink of my mother's fork against her plate was the only sound. She froze mid-bite, eyes locked on the yellow yolk bleeding across her toast. My father didn't look up. He chewed, slow and deliberate, as though he could grind my question into dust between his molars. Then, after what felt like an hour of silence, stretched across 30 seconds, he set his fork down. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I realized I had never really seen my father. Not him, not the man. Only the role: provider, disciplinarian, rule maker. But what I saw in that moment was different, raw. Something like iron left along in the rain, hard, but corroded from the inside. "Your new life begins when you walk out that door," he said. "What is in this house is part of your old one. You will leave it behind." Each word dropped like a coffin nail. My stomach turned over. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't warning me. He was dismissing me, closing a book without ever letting me see the last chapter. My mother dabbed her mouth with a napkin, though she hadn't taken a bite. Her hands shook. That was when it clicked the way her knuckles went white on the knife. When I asked about the knocking at 13, the way she used to fly down the hallway the instant I touched their doorknob, it wasn't fear of me finding out. It was fear of me confirming what I already suspected. Fear of me naming it out loud, of dragging their secret into daylight where it would wither like a roach flipped on its back. I didn't push further, not at the table. My father's tone had the weight of final judgment. But inside me something broke open, something that had been sealed since I was a kid with his ear pressed to the wallpaper. This was it, my last chance. Now or never. I spent the rest of the day pretending. I let my parents hug me with stiff arms. I let my dad say he was proud of me, though the word proud sounded like it had been borrowed from another language. I let my mother slip $50 into my hand like I was 12 again. I smiled. I promised to visit, but, in the back of my mind, a clock was ticking louder than the knocking had ever been. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, memorizing the cracks and water stains I'd lived under my whole life. Outside, the street lamp cast pale bars through the blinds, striping my room like a prison cell. Around 5 a.m., I heard the front door shut, the garage open, and the familiar roar of my father's truck. 5 minutes later, my mother's car followed. They were gone, off to work, just like every other weekday. The house was mine. The silence was suffocating. Not peaceful silence. This was the kind that pressed against your skin, heavy and deliberate, like a hand clamped over your mouth. I stood in the hallway, staring at their door, heart ricocheting inside my ribs. I knew where the spare key was. Everyone in the family did. The ceramic cookie jar shaped like a pig in the kitchen, cheerful and ridiculous, guarding spare change and secrets in equal measure. My hands shook as I lifted the lid, the faint scrape of ceramic echoing like thunder in the empty house. My fingers brushed metal cold, unforgiving brass. The key. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe it was me, finally feeling the weight of it. I walked back down the hallway, each step deliberate. The carpet muffled me, but in my ears it was a drumbeat. My palms were slick, my breathing shallow. For 21 years, that door had been the horizon line of my life, and now the sun was going to rise behind it. The key slid into the lock with a click far too smooth, like the door had been waiting for me. I turned it. My parents weren't there to stop me. My father's voice wasn't there to flatten me with threats. My mother's hand wasn't there to yank me back into safety or punishment. It was just me, the door, and the truth on the other side. I twisted the knob. The door opened, and the world I thought I knew ended with a soft, almost polite creak. The door opened into a hush so complete, it felt staged, like the house itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of lavender and cedar, my mother's perfume, my father's aftershave, a cloying mix of comfort and suffocation. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the morning sun. Dust hung in the air, each particle moving slow, as though gravity itself worked differently in this room. The room was ordinary, too ordinary, the kind of ordinary that felt designed. Bed perfectly made, dresser aligned against the wall, and the wardrobe a hulking, dark beast of wood, anchored like a sentinel on the far side. Then I heard it. Thump, thump. It was clearer than ever. No mistaking it for pipes, no blaming the house settling. The rhythm carried intention, fragile but determined. The way someone might tap their knuckles against a coffin lid, just hoping someone outside might answer. My chest tightened. I moved closer, step by step, until the wardrobe loomed over me like a headstone. My knees bent without permission, and I pressed my ear to the plaster beside it. The sound was right there. No more layers of distance, just drywall between me and whatever was knocking. I whispered before I even realized I was speaking. Hello? Is someone there? The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was violent. It wasn't just absence of sound. It was a suffocating vacuum, a void so deep I thought I'd been swallowed by it. My pulse hammered in my ears, loud enough to drown me. For a second, I thought I had imagined everything. 21 years of paranoia, hallucinations, childhood fears stacked on top of one another until they built this moment. Then it came. A voice, weak, rasping, stretched thin like it had been dragged across decades of dust and pain. It seeped through the wall, fractured syllables breaking against my ear. KLME. My whole body jerked back like I'd touched a live wire. The words crawled down my spine like ice water. No, I had misheard. It had to be help me, or free me, or anything else. But then it came again, stronger this time, trembling with desperation. Kill me, please. The voice was female, frail but insistent, like the last breath of someone who should have died long ago, but had been allowed to. My knees gave out. I hit the carpet, staring at the wardrobe, my throat dry as sandpaper. My mind skittered to the darkest place possible. My parents had someone locked inside the wall. A prisoner, years, decades. That's why the room was forbidden. Why the punishments were so severe. Why the knocking was never acknowledged. My parents weren't protectors, they were jailers. Monsters. I reached trembling hands toward the wardrobe. It wasn't just furniture anymore, it was a barricade, a deliberate shield. My fingers curled around the carved edges. The wood was old and heavy, every grain pressed with the weight of generations. I pulled, it didn't budge. I pulled again, harder, the muscles in my arms screaming, my shoes slipping against the carpet. The wardrobe groaned, scraped across the floor an inch, then another. My breath tore from me in ragged bursts, sweat slicking my forehead. Inch by inch, I dragged it aside, until finally the space behind it revealed itself. Not a wall, a door. Small, painted the same color as the wall, so perfectly camouflaged that if you didn't know, you'd never see it. A brass knob gleamed faintly in the dim light, cold and ordinary, mocking me with its simplicity. My hand shook as I reached for it. The metal was icy under my skin, as though it had never been touched by warmth. I twisted, the latch clicked, the door opened with a sigh, low and mournful, like something relieved to finally be disturbed. Darkness waited beyond, thick and stale, rolling out in a breath that smelled of dust, wax, and something far older, something that had been waiting. I stood frozen at the threshold, staring into the sliver of black. The house around me seemed to tilt, funneling me forward, urging me into the place no one was supposed to see. The voice echoed again, faint but clear, inside my skull this time, not through the wall. Kill me, and I stepped across the threshold. The hidden door swung wide, and the darkness inside felt alive. Not moving, not whispering, alive, the way a graveyard feels alive at night, when you know the soil is full of things that don't belong in the earth. I pushed the door open fully. The hinges moaned, a long, tired sound, like something begging not to be disturbed. My hand trembled on the knob, slick with sweat, but I forced myself forward. The space was smaller than I expected, a closet, maybe, but this wasn't storage. This wasn't convenience. This was a secret. The first thing I noticed was the smell: stale wax, dust, and something else. sweet and sour, faint like fruit left too long in the sun. The second thing was the clutter. Not junk, but items that belonged to a different life. A tiny dress, pink with white trim, hanging limp on a nail. A mobile, its faded pastel animals swaying slightly, even though the air was still. A stack of photo albums leaned against the wall, their covers warped with age. I reached for the top one, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. The handwriting across the cover was delicate, familiar. Our angel. I opened it. The first pages showed my parents' young Brit-tide. Their smiles real in a way I'd never seen in person. My mother's face wasn't hollow with exhaustion. My father's jaw wasn't locked with grief. They were laughing, holding something in their arms. A baby. Dark hair like mine. My father's eyes. Page after page. The baby grew in the photos. Swaddled in blankets. Propped up with stuffed animals. Staring at the camera with the helpless curiosity of a newborn. But there was no toddler. No first steps. No cake smeared across cheeks at a birthday party. The photos stopped almost as soon as they began. The last one was the baby asleep, mouth slack, a peaceful weight in my mother's arms. My stomach turned, the album slid from my hands and hit the floor with a dull slap. That was when I saw the altar. It sat in the center of the cramped space, a small wooden table draped in lace. The cloth yellowed and curling at the edges. Candles crowded the surface. Wax dripped down like frozen tears. Some were tall and fresh. Others were burned into stubs, their wicks drowned in hardened pools. This wasn't decoration. This was ritual. And on the altar, placed carefully on a silk pillow, lay the thing that made my throat close. At first, my brain refused to name it. It looked too wrong, too impossible. A body, tiny, shrunken, desiccated, skin stretched paper-thin over fragile bones. The face collapsed inward, lips drawn back, a dark O where a mouth should be. A mummified child, displayed like a relic in a church. The air seemed to pulse. My ears rang with a pressure that wasn't sound. My knees locked, and yet I felt pulled forward, like strings wound around my ribs were being tugged from inside that corpse. Against every shred of sanity, I reached out. My hand hovered, trembling, then landed on the dry, leathery forehead. Cold, not the chill of a freezer, the cold of absence. The world detonated. Visions slammed into me, raw and unstoppable. A hospital room, harsh white lights, my mother sobbing into my father's chest, his face blank with shock, a doctor saying words like nails hammered into my skull. I'm so sorry. Your daughter is gone. My parents in this very room, their faces hollowed by grief, cradling the still body wrapped in a hospital blanket. My father, frantic, drawing symbols on the floor with red chalk, muttering, "We can bring her back. The book said we can. We just have to anchor her." The tiny body laid on the altar. Candles flickering, words whispered in a language that tasted like blood in my mouth. A surge of air, ice cold, and then the corpse twitching. Just once. And then I felt it. A mind, a soul, dragged back into flesh that couldn't hold her. A scream muffled inside skin that couldn't move. A consciousness swelling, growing, trapped, decades of it. A child's spirit aging without a body, clawing at the walls, thumping her small fist against the prison her parents had built. The knocking, her knocking. And now, in my head, louder than thought itself, she screamed, "Please, kill me." I tore my hand away, stumbling back, crashing against the wall. My throat burned with bile, my vision blurred with tears. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't some prisoner my parents had taken. This was their daughter, my sister, and they had bound her here. The room tilted around me as if the walls had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. My palms pressed flat against the plaster to keep from collapsing. The vision wasn't gone. It had branded itself into my skull. I could still feel her, not just the memory of her, but her presence. A consciousness that shouldn't exist, buzzing under my skin like a fever. It wasn't like remembering someone else's nightmare. It was like inheriting it. Every blink, I saw flashes, her infant body stiff and cold in my mother's arms. Her soul wrenched back into it by ritual words that tasted like broken glass. She had no muscles to scream with, no lungs to breathe with, yet she screamed anyway, silent and eternal, inside the coffin of her own skin. The first years blurred into an unending fog. Time had no meaning for her. Just hunger that never faded, thirst that never eased, and the relentless pounding of her thoughts against the sealed wall of her prison. Thump, thump, thump. That was all she could do. Knock, knock. My knees buckled and I dropped to the floor. The thin carpet pressed against my face, but I couldn't close my eyes without seeing more. I saw birthdays that never happened, toys she never touched. I saw my parents in this room, kneeling at the altar, whispering lullabies to a corpse. They dressed her in those tiny dresses hanging on the wall, changed the silk pillow beneath her brittle skull, lit candles that guttered in the stale air. My mother hummed to her. My father prayed over her. Neither of them heard her scream, or maybe they did, and chose not to. The vision swelled, bleeding into my own thoughts. I wasn't me anymore. I was her. A child growing older, but never aging. Her mind expanding like a balloon stretched over broken glass. She could hear, she could think, she could feel the world in fragments. My mother's perfume lingering in the air, my father's footsteps pacing in the dark. She knew decades had passed because she heard me. My childish whispers through the wall, the times I pressed my ear to listen, the shuffle of my shoes retreating when my mother caught me. She had been there, behind it all, begging in the only way she could, and now she was inside me, rattling the bars of my skull. Kill me. Her voice boomed in my head, no longer weak and rasping but thunderous, splitting me in two. Please, brother, please. I clutched my temples, screaming, though I didn't remember opening my mouth. My voice cracked the silence of the house, a desperate, feral sound that didn't belong to me. No. I begged the air. I can't. The room pulsed red behind my eyelids. My sister's memories wrapped around mine until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. My first day of kindergarten blurred with her first knock against the wall. My teenage crush overlapped with her despair when she realized she would never touch sunlight. My moving boxes stacked in my room dissolved into her years of staring at the inside of a coffin lid, screaming into silence. I staggered back to the altar, my legs moving without thought. Her body lay still, dry and lifeless, but her soul thrashed inside it like a drowning animal. End it, she pleaded. Please, you have to. Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to run, to slam the hidden door shut, drag the wardrobe back into place, and pretend none of it existed. But the moment I thought of leaving, her presence surged, searing through me like a hot brand, a wave of agony, not my nurse. 30 years of begging compressed into a single second and poured into my veins. I gagged, doubled over, choking on air. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The only way out was the one she demanded. Mercy. Mercy in its ugliest form. My parents hadn't been monsters. Not exactly. They had been broken people, cracked wide open by grief and desperate enough to carve out a hole in reality. But their love had twisted into cruelty. They hadn't given their daughter a second life. They had built her a private hell, and they had left me to find it. I fell to my knees again, staring at her desiccated face. The sockets were closed, empty, yet I felt her watching me, waiting. I whispered, voice shredded raw, I'll do it. The house seemed to sigh. The pressure eased, just a fraction, enough for me to draw a ragged breath. She believed me, and I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that I couldn't live another hour with her screams inside my head. I had to set her free, even if it meant destroying everything else. The decision didn't feel like a choice. It felt like inevitability, like the moment after you've slipped on ice and you're suspended in the air, knowing gravity is about to drag you down. My sister's screams had quieted, replaced with something more silence, expectant, waiting. I moved on autopilot. From the foot of my parents' bed, I grabbed a blanket. Faded blue, soft from years of washing. My mother's blanket? I carried it back into the hidden room and laid it open like a shroud. The corpse was smaller than I expected, lighter than I thought it would be. When I lifted her, it was like cradling a bundle of brittle sticks wrapped in parchment. Yet there was weight beyond flesh, psychic weight. The burden of decades pressed into my arms. My hands shook as I wrapped her carefully, reverently, the way I imagined my mother must have the night she brought the body home from the hospital. The moment the blanket folded over her face, the pressure in my skull eased. Her presence settled into a heavy, exhausted sigh inside me, like a child finally being carried to bed. I slid her into my duffel bag, the same bag ID packed with hoodies and jeans, and the photograph of me at the county fair. Now it held something sacred and obscene. I didn't move the wardrobe back. I didn't close the hidden door. Let my parents see, let them walk in, and know their secret was no longer theirs alone. The key to their room lay heavy in my palm. I set it on the kitchen table. My father's words rang in my head. What is in this house is part of your old life. You will leave it behind. I wasn't leaving it behind. I was stealing it. The drive blurred. Streets and stoplights passed without meaning. My knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel. Every time I glanced at the duffel in the passenger seat, my chest tightened, expecting the bag to twitch, to knock, to whisper, but it stayed still, silent. Inside my head, though, I felt her, not screaming anymore, not begging, just there. A presence that had grown used to confinement and didn't quite believe freedom was possible. She was wary, hopeful, fragile. Hours later, the city thinned into rusting barns and abandoned billboards. I didn't know where I was driving until I was already there, an old scrapyard on the edge of nowhere. Piles of twisted metal jutted against the sky, broken cars stacked like gravestones. The smell of oil and rust filled my lungs. I killed the engine. Silence wrapped around me, broken only by the chirp of unseen insects. The duffel felt lighter as I carried it into the yard. Or maybe I was numb. I found an open space between two mountains of rusted car doors and broken washing machines. The ground was dirt, dry and cracked. I set the bag down. My hands moved mechanically, gathering scraps, old wooden pallets, splintered boards, anything that would burn. My body remembered 1,000 campfires from boyhood. Though none of them carried this weight, I built a pyre. Small, but solid. A platform of wood stacked into a careful structure. Then I unzipped the duffel. The blanket unfurled, slow and solemn. I whispered an apology with every motion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My throat burned, words catching like sparks in my chest. She was there, revealed one final time, small, shriveled, impossibly ancient, and heartbreakingly innocent. My sister. I laid her on the pyre, arranging the blanket beneath her like a cradle. My hands lingered on the edge of the fabric, unwilling to let go. I pulled a lighter from my pocket, cheap plastic, half empty, the kind you buy at a gas station for smokes you don't admit to. I flicked it once, twice. A flame bloomed, weak but defiant. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. The enormity of it crashed over me. This was not just burning a corpse. This was burning my parents' entire world. The altar they'd built, the secret they'd nurtured, the only piece of their daughter they had left. The act would sever me from them forever. But then I felt her, not a scream this time, not agony, just a whisper inside my bones. "Thank you." My hand steadied. I touched the flame to the wood. Dry splinters caught first, then the pallet, then the blanket. Fire spread like hungry hands, crawling toward her body. The smell of burning fabric and dry timber filled the air. When the flames reached her, they flared bright, snapping and spitting sparks into the night. For a terrible moment, I expected to hear her screams again. Instead, I felt relief pour through me, a tidal wave of gratitude, sorrow, and release. She was leaving. The flames devoured her body, reducing her tiny prison to ash and smoke. The wind carried the smoke upward, into the black sky, as though delivering her spirit to a place my parents had refused to let her go. My knees buckled, and I fell into the dirt, sobbing. Sobs that tore my throat raw, louder than the crackle of the fire. I cried for her, for the sister I never got to know. I cried for my parents who had loved too much and in the wrong way. And I cried for myself, because I had done the most merciful thing I could imagine, and it was also the most monstrous. The fire raged until nothing was left but glowing coals and drifting ash. She was free, but I was ruined. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing like a dying constellation in the dirt. Smoke rose in thin threads, curling into the night sky, vanishing into the stars. I stayed kneeling in the dirt until my legs went numb, until my throat was raw from crying, until I couldn't tell if the wetness on my cheeks was sweat or tears or both. I had freed her. That was the thought that anchored me. I repeated it like prayer beads, rolling it through my mind to keep from unraveling. I freed her. I freed her. I freed her. And yet, beneath that mantra, guilt gnawed like rats in the walls. My parents, they would come home to the silence of a house that had always breathed with a hidden heartbeat. They would see the wardrobe shoved aside, the secret door yawning open like a wound. They would walk inside and find nothing, no altar, no body, no daughter, just emptiness, as final and merciless as a gravestone. They would know what I had done, and in knowing, they would hate me, not just anger, hatred, the kind that lives in bone marrow. I had taken from them the only piece of her they had left, even if that piece had been twisted into something unholy. Their grief had forged a prison, but it was still the prison they had chosen to live inside. By tearing it open, I hadn't just freed my sister, I had destroyed my family. The thought clamped around my chest like a vice. I staggered to my feet, legs trembling, and stumbled back toward the car. The scrapyard loomed behind me, its twisted silhouettes like witnesses carved in rust. The embers glowed faintly in my rearview mirror as I drove away. A funeral pyre for a life that had never been allowed to end. The visions didn't leave with the fire. They clung to me. Ghost images burned into the back of my skull. I saw my sister's tiny face in every shadow, heard her phantom knocking in the rhythm of my tires on the asphalt. But the scream, the endless tortured scream, was gone, and that silence was heavier than sound. Back on the highway, the world looked wrong. Too bright, too alive. Gas stations buzzed with neon. Cars hummed past with laughter spilling from rolled-down windows. People living their small, ordinary lives, untouched by the horror that had defined mine. I felt like an imposter moving through their world, carrying ash in my lungs where air should be. When I finally reached my empty apartment, I collapsed on the bare mattress. Fully dressed, duffel bags still at my feet. The faint smell of smoke clung to my clothes, to my skin, to everything. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I saw my parents' faces when they would walk into that room tomorrow. My mother's trembling hands, my father's granite stare cracking for the first time in decades. They would never forgive me, and I couldn't forgive myself. But my sister was gone, finally gone. Her voice echoed one last time, faint and weightless inside me, not a scream this time but a sigh. Thank you. It was mercy, it was monstrosity, it was both. I had killed what was already dead. I had freed a soul bound by love so desperate it had curdled into cruelty. And in doing so, I had damned myself to carry both their grief and mine. When the sun rose the next morning, I sat by the window, watching the lights spill over the city. People hurried down sidewalks with coffee cups. Kids in backpacks ran to catch buses. Life grinding forward as though the world wasn't haunted. But I knew better. The world was full of locked doors. And I was the kind of fool who opened them.